Morning, everyone. Last week, we started a new sermon series called Unsung Heroes. And it's really about those Bible characters that are in the background that we gloss over. And some of them, we know their names, some of them we don't, but basically we tend to stick to the big guns like David, Peter, and so on. People I can't remember. But the reason why I put this together is that sometimes we feel like the unsung heroes. So it's celebrating that as well, that God sees us, and that's the tagline. Unsung heroes, the God who sees. And so I was thinking of this story, which we'll read about in a bit. And it's about a man who had, it sounds like one of those fairy stories. Actually, I had a joke and I was going to tell you, and I thought, no, I won't bother. You're all right then. So it's one of my favourite jokes. Some of you will have heard it, but it's about this man who has 3 daughters. And he says to them, you know, you're old enough now to go off and get yourself some husbands. And they said, but Daddy, we can't leave. And he goes, no, you need to go. So off the 3 go. And then before long, the eldest comes back and goes, Daddy. He goes, yes. Oh, what I need to tell you is that they're a family of potatoes. So the eldest comes back and goes, Daddy. He goes, yes. I found a potato. And he goes, what is it? And she goes, oh, you'll love it. It's a King Edward. Ooh, he says, great. Bit of blue blood in the family. Yes, you can go and get married. So off she goes, gets married. Next comes the middle potato. He goes, Daddy, I found a potato of my dreams. He goes, what is it? It's a royal blue. Ooh, more royal blood in the family. Great, go off and get married. Along comes the youngest. And she goes, Daddy, I'm in love with the greatest potato in the world. And he goes, what is it? And she goes, Gary Lineker. And he goes, what? She goes, yes, it's Gary Lineker. You can't marry him. She goes, she goes, why not? He's a commentator. So, and you're going, so what's that got to do with the sermon? A very, very tenuous link. It's a man with daughters. But in this story, the man has 5 daughters, and he doesn't send them off to get married to potatoes particularly. But what happens is he dies, but he has no sons. And in our day and age, we tend to lose what that means, because in that day, if you don't have sons, then there are lots of consequences with that. The women don't have any rights. The rights go through the male. So as daughters, they don't get access to the land. We'll read about that in a bit. So, in fact, we'll read about it now. So, if you look up Numbers 27, 1 to 12, I'm going to read a little bit on from that, but find Numbers 27, 1 to, actually it's 1 to 11, really, but as I said, I'm going to read on a little bit more from that. So, whilst you're finding it, I will Zelophehad's daughters. I practiced that so much. No, I didn't. Okay, 27. The daughters of Zelophehad, son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Micah, the son of Manasseh, belonged to the clans of Manasseh, son of Joseph. The names of the daughters were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. Is the reading not up? Great. So we're now on to verse 2. So these daughters, they came forward and stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the leaders, and the whole assembly at the entrance to the tent of meeting, and said, "Our father died in the wilderness. He was not among Korah's followers who banded together against the Lord, but he died for his own sin and left no sons. Why should our father's name disappear from his clan because he had no son? Give us property among our father's relatives." So Moses brought their case before the Lord. And the Lord said to him, "What Zelophehad's daughters are saying is right. You must certainly give them property as an inheritance among their father's relatives, and give their father's inheritance to them. Say to the Israelites, if a man dies and leaves no son, give his inheritance to his daughter. If he has no daughter, give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, give his inheritance to his father's brothers. And if his father had no brothers, give his inheritance to the nearest relative in his clan, that he may possess it. This is to have the force of law for the Israelites, as the law commanded Moses." So that's where read up to. But I want to read this next bit, which is, if you've got it on your phones, it's verse 15. Moses said to the Lord, "May the Lord, the God who gives breath to all living things, appoint someone over this community to go out and come in before them, one who will lead them out and bring them in. So the Lord's people will not be like a sheep without a shepherd." So the Lord said to Moses, "Take Joshua, son of Nun, a man in whom is the spirit of leadership, and lay your hand on him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest and the entire assembly, and commission him in their presence. Give him some of your authority so the whole Israelite community will obey him." Now move on to verse 22. And Moses did as the Lord commanded. So I want you to keep that last bit in mind. Now, what you need to remember is that we have these daughters, and I don't know how the conversation would have come up if they were sitting round having a biscuit, a cup of tea or something, and they said, what's happening is not right. I don't know how they would have come up and who decided what to do. But what we do know is that the sisters felt what was happening was unfair, and they wanted to do something about it. The sisters were challenging tradition, social expectations, a whole system. And they decided to go and speak to Moses. Now, in our heads, or in my head, I just thought, nice to go to speak to Moses, past a few little tents a long way. And then I suddenly thought, what does it mean? They passed the whole assembly. Now, some of you have been doing the discipleship course, and you'll know that the tent of meeting where Moses would have been in the middle. And you've got the Jewish tribes centered around the tent. The tent was no small thing, but even more, neither were the Jewish tribes. They were quite large. When I thought of a camp, I thought of something like Butlins, you know, and they were probably wandering past a few tents, but no, or new wine. And then I thought, how many people are we talking about? This is how my head goes. How many people are we talking about? We're talking new wine. It would be, what, around 16,000. I Googled it. And, and Spring Harvest was, because some of you have been to Spring Harvest, and it's quite big, isn't it? And, well, Spring Harvest is double the amount. So walking from around Spring Harvest to the big tent, I thought, no, it's bigger than that, isn't it? Because it's the whole of the Jewish community, the Israelite community. It's bigger. So I thought, okay, so it will probably be like Glastonbury maybe, because that's about 200,000 people. But it's bigger than that. We're talking about 1 million people. And they would have walked through the community, and they were at the west end. Moses was at the east end, so it was the opposite of the community. So if you get it in your head, these 5 sisters would have walked through the camp. I don't know how long it would have taken them, but they'd have to pass the various tribes. And they were situated with Manasseh, Ephraim, and Benjamin, and they would have walked past. It depends where they walked, if they walked on that side or that side, but they'd have to walk all the way past their thing, down to get to the front. That would be a few miles. Now, as they're walking, remember in those days, women were not really meant to be walking on their own. They would have had to be escorted, but it doesn't say they were escorted. So I would imagine that they're walking and then people are like, what are they doing? As they watch. Did they know the story? I don't know. We don't know. But they walked through the camp. Heads turning. Passing the leaders. Passing the priests. And then they pass Eliezer and present themselves in front of Moses. And then they have the audacity to say, why should our father's name disappear simply because he had no son? They speak to Moses. I can imagine the bodyguards shuffling. What are they doing? I don't know what Moses would have done, because now, as I say, we don't see this. It took courage. But I'm sure there was a sharp intake of breath. It took courage for them to ask the question. It took courage for them to be visible in front of everyone. And it took even more courage to say, this is not right. But you know, actually, I also wonder what the other women were thinking when they walked past. I don't know. But anyway, what I do want you to notice is this. Something happened, I feel, is very important in that story. They go to Moses, and what does Moses do? He listens. He listens. You see, justice happens when leaders choose to listen. Moses listened to the sisters. This, I feel, is one of the most powerful features of this story. You see, he didn't do what some of our leaders would probably do today. He didn't go, what do you think you're doing? Get back to your tents where you belong. No, he didn't say that. He didn't say, oh yeah, you know, I hear what you're saying. Sorry about that, but this is just the way it is. Sorry, it's out of my hands. Can't do anything, they're tired. Sorry. He didn't do that. He didn't embarrass them and say, you are a disgrace. You walk through the camp thinking you own the place, embarrassing everybody, embarrassing me. What will the nations around think about us, that we can't keep our women in control? He didn't say that either. And he didn't do what some people probably thought should have happened. Stone the women! Stone them! How dare they challenge God? No, he didn't. Instead, he took their concern seriously. Moses chose to listen. And in a world where power often speaks first and listens last, it's something we can take from this. But the story doesn't stop there. After hearing the women, instead of making the decision for himself and deciding what to do, Moses does something even more important. He goes and asks God. He was a leader after all. He could have made a decision. He could have said no. But even though he had the people's confidence, including the sisters and the people in the camp, he chooses to not lie on his own understanding, and he chooses to go to God with the problem. True leadership chooses to seek God first before making the decision. He brings this matter to God. And what happens next is the turning point in this story. You see, God honors those who pursue justice. These women were wanting justice. And what God says is, these daughters are right. God honors the sisters. And not only that, he does even more. He makes a new law. A new law for all of Israel. If a man dies without a son, his daughters will inherit the land. This is extraordinary, unprecedented. The women ask for justice for themselves. But God's response goes even further. The sisters challenge the protocol. And what happens is God makes a law, a new law. The land that they're going in will not belong to men. Women will now have a share. But you know, the women always had a share. That's the thing, the women always had a share. It was just not recognized because the men were doing their little bit. So their courage starts a chain reaction. And notice, the sisters take the action. Moses listens to them. Moses seeks God. God responds. And what began with 5 women wanting to have justice for themselves changes into a law that changes and benefits the whole nation. God often waits for someone to start a process, to step forward, someone to ask that question, someone to name the injustice, someone to speak and act and begin the movement. And when it happens, when somebody takes that courage, then God can move. And then God can make the space. It gives God to make the space to make changes. So courage was needed to ask, but it was also needed to lead differently. Moses needed to actively seek God. And even more courage, because it meant he was breaking protocol. It was against the tide. Sometimes justice advances because someone dares to ask and someone dares to listen and enforce God's decision. But you see, what is also important with this, with the next part of that story that I read to you, it was something for the next generation. Immediately after the story, we hear that Joshua is chosen to lead the nation into the promised land. And so he's commissioned in front of everybody as the leader. And then when you go into Joshua, the first book of Joshua, the first chapter of Joshua, God says to Joshua, be courageous. And he says it 3 times. Be strong and courageous. And God adds something else. He says, Joshua must do everything God has commanded through Moses. What does that mean? Everything means, remember, you were commanded to give the women the right to the land. Do everything I have commanded. So none of the men could challenge that because that was what God had commanded. And so Joshua had the strength and the courage to follow through these laws, just as God had commanded him to do. He had to honor God's justice. Where there is no male heir, women can inherit a portion of the land. So the courage of the sisters becomes part of the law Joshua must uphold. So our place in the story, where's our place in the story today? The sisters? There are moments when we need to stand and ask God for justice. Ask maybe where you're working, things aren't right. Moments when courage means speaking out, challenging things that are happening around you. Systems that exclude and diminish others, including ourselves. What about Moses? When you hear the voices of those around you who are saying things, who see the unfairness around them, do you dismiss them? Or are you actually listening carefully? And not only that, when you listen, not just dismissing, but you take their concerns and you seek God for wisdom before responding. Or what about Joshua? Called to be bold and courageous, not just in strength and fighting people, but in faithfulness to what God has commanded. Are there things that you are meant to be doing, but you just need to uphold and do the things that God has called you to do? So to conclude this story, it's one of many that shows us that God often brings and begins change through ordinary people, just like those sisters. And we are ordinary people. And we need sometimes to have that courage to take action. So I ask again, what is God calling us to do? What is he calling you to do? Are there things around you that he's asking you to take a stance on? To listen to people, to seek God, and to do what he's commanded you to do. Because sometimes our actions can be the catalyst that brings about change in our families and our neighborhoods. Let's just take a moment to reflect on these as I call the band up. Maybe you feel that you need to ask God for something just for yourself. These women were asking for things, something for themselves. It may not even be about injustice. It just may be something you've been asking God for, petitioning God for. And the thing is, God sees. God understands. What have you been asking God about? And if you want prayer, somebody to stand with you, as you bring that petition before God, just as Moses stood with the sisters, maybe that's for you. You may want to pray with the person next to you, or you want to pray with somebody on the side. We can do that. God sees you and God hears you. Amen.